about back taxes. Maybe you missed the April deadline or your books are a mess. You definitely don't want to wait, folks. The IRS is cracking down with penalties that add up really fast. We're talking 5% per month, up to 25% just for not filing. There is help, though. Tax Network USA can take the burden off of your shoulders and stop the spiral before it gets worse. They've helped thousands of Americans, whether you're an employee, a small business owner, or if you haven't filed in years. If you've got messy books, none of that is a problem. They've seen it all, and they know exactly how to clear it up. With direct access to powerful IRS programs and expert negotiators on their side, Tax Network USA knows how to win. You'll get a free consultation, and if you qualify, they'll even be able to reduce or eliminate what you owe. More importantly, they'll help protect you from wage garnishments or bank levies. So, don't wait for the next IRS letter. Instead, call 800-905-8000 or visit tnusa.com to talk to a real expert at Tax Network USA. Take the pressure off and let Tax Network USA handle your tax issues. Terrence Bates here with your Real America's Voice news break. The disdain between President Trump and Fed Chair Jerome Powell appears to be moving from name-calling to a potential lawsuit. The White House says the president is considering filing suit against the Fed chair over Powell's management of renovations at the Fed's D.C. headquarters. Federal officials are investigating the cost of facelifts at two historic Fed buildings, alleging poor oversight and potential fraud. According to Fed documents, the cost was initially estimated at $1.9 billion. That price has since ballooned to about $2.4 billion, with President Trump and others arguing that the real number is closer to $3 billion and even beyond that. All of this comes as President Trump continues to be vocal about his wish to remove Jerome Powell as chairman of the central bank. One of his major concerns is Powell's reluctance to cut interest rates. And President Trump's $175 billion Golden Dome missile defense system is beginning to take shape. It will reportedly include 4 layers. 1 would be satellite-based, the other 3 would be land-based. That's a quick check of your headlines.
Will not be silenced. You're listening to The Charlie Kirk Show.
Okay, everybody, welcome back. Email us, as always, freedom@charliekirk.com, and subscribe to our podcast. We have Senator Mike Lee in just a second. Let's play one of the videos that is going very viral on TikTok. We got to upload more, guys. Some of these need to be updated here, but let's play cut 1. Yes, ma'am. How are you?
Good. How are you?
What's your name?
Dakota.
Nice to meet you, Dakota. How old are you?
I'm 11.
Amazing. Give it up for Dakota being here today.
So, I'm pro-life. I'm a fiscal conservative. And I know I want to get into politics when I grow up. I don't want to get into massive debt for a political science degree. What concrete steps can I take now in order to achieve the goal of doing my part to make America great again?
Oh, great. You should go to Hillsdale College, America's greatest college, and start studying now. Start taking classes, reading books. You have to be in charge of your own education, and the fact you're thinking like this at 11 is a great sign. God bless you, and the future is very bright. Thank you. We have received billions of views on TikTok. One of the reasons we have reached the next generation and moved them right is thanks to our ability to go viral on TikTok. When small businesses thrive on TikTok, so do the communities around them. Learn more about TikTok's contribution to the U.S. economy at TikTokEconomicImpact.com. The stories behind the stats at TikTokEconomicImpact.com. Portions of the Charlie Kirk Show are sponsored in part by TikTokEconomicImpact.com. Joining us now is Senator Mike Lee. Lots to talk about from the great state of Utah. Senator Lee, thank you so much for taking the time. Senator, before we talk about Maryland and Washington, D.C., what is your comment on the contrast between a MAGA movement and a Maggioni, Mamdani movement, the choice? It is a time for choosing in the philosophical sense that will, of course, then materialize politically. Senator Mike Lee.
Yeah, look, MAGA is the natural outgrowth of the American dream. It's the natural outgrowth of the English common law as its seeds were planted in the fabric of the United States at a very early stage. MAGA ultimately is about allowing the American people to realize who they are, to achieve what they want to achieve in this lifetime without undue interference for government. That's why it's lasting, just as the American Republic has been. And that's why it's going to work, just as the United States of America has become the greatest civilization the world has ever known. And it is that way because we've got a constitution that recognizes that people have certain things that are inalienably theirs, that cannot and must not ever be taken away by government. So the promise of MAGA is the promise of the Constitution and the American dream.
And that is one that transcends racial demographics, that transcends any sort of generational demographics. It's one that is critically important. Senator Lee, you've been making some headlines here, and I love this. So the Democrats are pushing for statehood, but you have a way to kind of work around it, which is, why don't we just give Washington, D.C. to Maryland? It's a brilliant idea, so smart, because it takes this off the table completely. And then, of course, the national parks could still be controlled no different than Acadia National Park or Yellowstone National Park or Grand Teton by the National Park Service and the Department of the Interior. So there would still be federal government control over the U.S., over the Washington Monument, the Jefferson Memorial, over the White House. But the city itself would then enter Maryland, hence then cutting off all the objections that they're taxed without representation. Senator Mike Lee, please walk us through this in great detail.
Yeah, okay. So first of all, remember that the District of Columbia was created for the specific purpose of making sure that our nation's capital wasn't set in a place where it would be subject to one state's or one locality's viewpoints, where it could truly be a national capital, where the national interests would govern, and where the seat of government wouldn't be subject to whatever whim the host state happened to have at that moment. So now that we've evolved a couple, nearly 250 years down the road, and we've got a group of people who now want to make Washington, D.C. a state. And I say, first of all, you do want a federal corridor, no matter what, I would think, so that you can protect the U.S. Capitol, the White House, the Supreme Court, the critical government buildings, many of which fit within a fairly narrow corridor of Washington, D.C., but most of the residential parts of it could go back to Maryland, just as the residential areas in what was previously the District of Columbia, the part that was given by the state of Virginia, was retroceded back to the state of Virginia in the 1840s. So if the people in the residential areas of Washington, D.C., if what they really want is congressional representation, if they really want the ability to vote for U.S. senators, let those residential areas go back to Maryland. We could maintain a narrow corridor in D.C. for the buildings that I mentioned. It would be important, Charlie, if we were to take that approach, we would, as a practical matter, need to undo the 23rd Amendment, which sets aside 3 electoral votes for D.C. You wouldn't want those 3 electoral votes being cast by what could be just a few hundred people in that narrow corridor. But this would work, and it doesn't require us to make D.C. a state. D.C., remember, doesn't have any of the diverse array of economic and cultural resources that we have traditionally required of a territory before bringing it in as a state. And it was never put in federal hands with the expectation that it would become a state on its own. So we've got to decide one way or another. If we're going to keep D.C. as is, D.C. needs to be governed under laws passed by Congress, because Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17 of the Constitution makes this a federal thing. It specifically says that Congress will have exclusive legislative jurisdiction over what we now call the District of Columbia. If we want to go that route, it does need to be refederalized. If they want votes in the United States Senate, they should do so through Maryland, through retrocession. We've got to pick one of those two, because statehood, that's not happening.
Yeah, statehood is not going to happen. So what is the process? Remind us again, Senator. Is there a vote? Does Congress do it? And the Democrats' inability to then absorb the DC would show their fraud. And interestingly, if we retrocede it, what would happen to DC's electoral votes? Right now, they get 3 electoral votes, I believe. Yeah, that's right. 3. I'm just drawing from memory.
Right.
3 electoral votes. So what would happen there?
Yeah, that's why I'm saying if we went this route, the route of Maryland retrocession, it would be imperative as a practical matter that we simultaneously repeal the 23rd Amendment, because it would make no sense to give 3 electoral votes to a narrow corridor in which there might only be a few dozen or a few hundred people living at the time. That was created as a compromise to figure out what to do with D.C. to allow D.C.'s residents to vote in presidential elections. That doesn't make D.C. a state, and that's why we would need to undo the 23rd Amendment if we went with retrocession. Unless, of course, in theory, you could retrocede the entire thing such that there is no more District of Columbia. If you did that, then I suppose you wouldn't have to get rid of the 23rd Amendment, because there'd be nothing there to provide those electoral votes.
Yeah, and so what would the process of that be? I mean, that's a big reach. And so again, I suppose then would the narrow part only with the monuments be the population? What would the process of getting rid of constitutional amendment be? It'd have to be a big vote of Congress. Democrats, I don't think, are going to willingly get rid of electoral votes for themselves. We're not doing this for electoral votes, actually. We're simply trying to meet them off at the pass of their scam to try to make Washington, D.C. a state. Senator Mike Lee.
No, that's exactly right. Now, here's what the process looks like. If you want to amend the Constitution to get rid of the 23rd Amendment, it would take a 2/3 supermajority vote in both houses of Congress to propose the amendment absent the Constitutional Convention, which is a different process. And then any amendments proposed that way have to be ratified by 3/4 of the states. You can alternatively propose them by state legislatures calling for Congress to convene a convention for that purpose. Congress then convenes the convention proposes amendments. Those amendments become effective only after being ratified by 3/4 of the states. By contrast, the part about retroceding, that can be done statutorily, doesn't require a constitutional amendment in and of itself. And because it would be changing the boundaries of an existing state, the Constitution would also require the consent of the Maryland state legislature in order to do that. These things would work. And they would give people those votes. And I think it's something that we ought to consider. But in the meantime, I also think it's important for us to focus on the here and now, on what the law is and what it says right now. Since 1973, Congress has abdicated its authority, its responsibility, its duty, I believe, under Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17, by enacting in 1973 something called the D.C. Home Rule Act. And that act has delegated Congress's power over D.C. to the D.C. city government, to the mayor and city council. The problem with that is they have not handled it well. They have allowed lawlessness to prevail to the point where we've got this massive crime wave that's been sweeping through our nation's capital for many years now. It's not safe. And as we've seen before, as we've seen this week, as we saw certainly in 2020, when we had to have National Guard troops brought in the George Floyd summertime riots of 2020, D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser evicted them from D.C. She didn't want them there. What that shows, Charlie, is that the people of D.C. apparently have very different priorities for our nation's capital than the country as a whole. Now, that's fine. I don't expect the entire country necessarily to agree with the governing strategy of any city in Utah, but D.C. is different than any other city. D.C. is made specifically subject to Congress's exclusive legislative jurisdiction. It is anathema to that concept. It is repugnant to the constitutional text and structure to take a non-delegable duty to make exclusive law, to make the law as the exclusive lawmaking body over a certain area and delegate that out to someone else. Going all the way back to the writings of Montesquieu, we know that this is a duty that cannot be delegated. And we made a huge mistake by delegating it.
That's right.
Exactly.
Spirit of the Laws by the French judge Montesquieu, who actually informed the worldview of the Founding Fathers even more than John Locke, some would argue. Senator Lee, thank you for your leadership on this. You and I can geek out about Montesquieu, Burke, Locke sometimes, and the beauty of the natural law, something I've been spending my summer studying. And once you understand the natural law and the laws of nature and nature is God, and that it's self-evident, you start to realize the entire structure of the U.S. government, which in itself I believe is scriptural and biblical. Senator Lee, wonderful job. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Charlie.
Email us, as always, freedom@charliekirk.com. Alan Jackson Ministries. Let's go to alanjackson.com. That is alanjackson.com. It's amazing. alanjackson.com/Charlie. I'm speaking at their upcoming Culture and Christianity podcast. It's informative and encouraging, and you can find it on YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Alan Jackson Ministries is working hard to bring biblical truth back into our culture. The Alan Jackson Ministry podcast is phenomenal. What makes it unique is Pastor Alan's biblical perspective. He takes the truth from the Bible and applies it to issues we're facing today. Gender confusion, abortion, immigration, Doge, Trump, and the White House, issues in the church. Go to Alan Jackson, that's ALLEN, Jackson.com/Charlie, AlanJackson.com/Charlie. Email us, as always, freedom@charliekirk.com. Subscribe to our podcast. I can probably say confidently that the police chief for Washington, D.C. does not know who Montesquieu is. I'll explain after the break.